Okay, as a grandma, I need to tell you something that's going to sound completely impossible, but I promise you, it's true. March 17, 1965. Let's say you're in New York City, or Boston, or Chicago, doesn't matter which one. It's St. Patrick's Day. You're 7 years old, and your mother dressed. You head to toe in green because, well, you know why. If you weren't wearing green, you'd get pinched all day long at school. Your father takes you downtown to watch the parade. Bagpipers everywhere, marching bands, people dressed up like leprechauns throwing candy to the kids. After the parade, maybe your dad stops at a bar and it's packed. Green beer flowing, everyone singing, everyone celebrating being Irish for the day. Now, same day, same exact day, March 17, 1965. But this time, you're in Dublin, Ireland. You know what's happening there. The bars are closed. I'm serious. The bars, the pubs in Ireland, on St. Patrick's Day, closed, locked. You couldn't get a drink if you tried. Hang on. Let me say that one more time, because I know you're thinking I'm making this up. On St. Patrick's Day, in Ireland, the bars were closed by law, and that right there, that's your first clue that the St. Patrick's Day you remember from growing up. Ireland didn't invent that. We did. So, your comment on my last video, you asked if I could do something about St. Patrick's Day. You remember it from when you were growing up, and you wanted to know the history. Well, I started looking into it, and what I found, honestly, it surprised me, because the St. Patrick's Day I remember, with the parades and the green everything and the pinching, that's not how Ireland celebrated it. Not even close. And I think you're going to find this as fascinating as I did. So let's talk about it. Alright, close your eyes for just a second. Really, close them. It's March 17th, sometime in the 1960s. Let's say, maybe early 70s. You're in elementary school, 3rd grade, 4th grade, somewhere around there, and you wake up that morning, and before you even get out of bed, you're thinking, do I have something green to wear? Because you know what happens if you don't wear green. You get pinched. And I don't mean a little pinch. I mean kids would hunt you down if you forgot. All day long. Where's your green? You're not wearing green. Pinch, pinch, pinch. It was brutal, honestly. So your mother would make sure you had something green on before you left the house. A green sweater, green socks, a green ribbon in your hair if you were a girl. And if you didn't own anything green, she'd pin a paper shamrock to your shirt. Problem solved. You'd get to school, and the classroom would be covered in shamrocks. Paper shamrocks everywhere, taped to the walls, hanging from the ceiling. And at lunch, the cafeteria would serve green milk. As a grandma, I'm not kidding, they'd put green food coloring in the milk, and we'd drink it and think it was the most exciting thing in the world. Green jello, green cupcakes, everything green. The teacher might tell you about leprechauns, little men in green suits who hide pots of gold at the end of rainbows. And if you catch one, he has to grant you 3 wishes. And we believed it, at least for a little while. After school, if you lived in a big city, New York, Boston, Chicago, Philadelphia, your dad might take you to watch the parade. Oh, the parades were something. Thousands of people lining the streets, bagpipers in those kilts playing music, marching bands, floats covered in shamrocks. People would be drinking, singing, dancing in the street, and the whole city would just shut down for the day. Everything was about St. Patrick's Day. Even people who weren't Irish would celebrate. Everybody was Irish on March 17th. That was just how it worked. That was St. Patrick's Day in America. When I was growing up, And I thought we all thought that's how it had always been. That's how they did it in Ireland, right? Wrong. While we were over here celebrating with green beer and parades and pinching people. In Ireland, they were doing absolutely none of that. In fact, I'm going to tell you something that sounds impossible. Ready? In Ireland, the country that St. Patrick is from, the bars were closed on St. Patrick's Day. The bars were closed. I need you to understand how wild that is. Okay, so here's what I didn't know until I started researching this. From the 1920s all the way through the 1950s, and in some parts of Ireland into the mid-1960s, pubs were closed on St. Patrick's Day by law. It was a religious feast day, like Easter. Solemn, serious, holy. Here's what a typical St. Patrick's Day looked like in Dublin in, say, 1955. You'd wake up, put on your church clothes, go to Mass. Then you'd come home and maybe watch the parade, but it wasn't like OUR parades. It was a military parade. Just soldiers marching through the streets. No floats, no leprechauns, no marching bands playing Danny Boy. Just soldiers. And then, after the parade, the day was over. Shops closed, pubs closed, everything shut down. People would go home and have a quiet dinner with their families. That was it. No parties, no celebrations, no green beer, because honestly, the very idea of green beer would have horrified them. And if you wanted a drink on St. Patrick's Day in Dublin, there was exactly one place you could get alcohol legally: the Royal Dublin Dog Show. I am not making this up, because it was a sporting event. They were allowed to serve drinks. So people who wanted a beer on St. Patrick's Day would buy a ticket to the dog show, not because they cared about the dogs, but because it was the only place serving alcohol. They'd stand there pretending to watch the dogs, drinking their pints, and then go home. That was the loophole. Now, think about that for a second. Same day, same saint, March 17th. In America, we're throwing parades with 100,000 people. We're drinking green beer. We're celebrating like it's the biggest party of the year. In Ireland, they're at church, and then they're sitting quietly at home. How did that happen? How did the same holiday become two completely different things? Well, the answer starts with tragedy, and the largest wave of immigration this country has ever seen. Between 1845 and 1852, Ireland went through what they called the Great Famine, the potato blight, the hunger. The potato crops failed. And when you're a country that depends almost entirely on potatoes to survive, that's catastrophic. 1 million people died of starvation. Another 2 million left the country. Most of them came here, to America. They got on ships, coffin ships, they called them, because so many people died on the voyage, and they came to Boston, New York, Philadelphia. They arrived with nothing, absolutely nothing. And when they got here, Americans didn't want them. There were entire political movements dedicated to keeping Irish Catholics out. The Know Nothing movement, they called it. Help wanted signs would say, "No Irish need apply." They were called disease-ridden, criminals, drunks, a burden on society. So the Irish did something really smart. They organized, and they used St. Patrick's Day as a way to show their strength. See, back in Ireland, St. Patrick's Day was a quiet religious day. But here in America, the Irish started organizing public parades. Big ones, loud ones. They'd march through the streets, thousands and thousands of people showing the city. We are here. We are organized. We are strong. You cannot ignore us. The first big St. Patrick's Day parade in New York City was back in 1762. Irish soldiers in the British Army organized it, but the parades really exploded after the Civil War, when Irish Americans wanted to prove they were loyal Americans and proud Irishmen at the same time. And by the early 1900s, St. Patrick's Day parades were huge. Hundreds of thousands of people marching, millions watching. And slowly, bit by bit, the celebration started to change. It wasn't just about showing strength anymore. It was becoming a party. America invents the celebration, so by the time we get to the 1950s and 60s, when you were growing up, St. Patrick's Day in America had turned into something Ireland wouldn't even recognize. Let me walk you through some of the things you remember. The things you thought were Irish traditions. Spoiler alert, they're not. Wearing green. So, in Ireland, wearing green was actually dangerous for a long time. During British rule, green was the color of Irish rebellion. If you wore green, you could be arrested. The original color associated with St. Patrick, blue. Not green, blue. But Irish immigrants in America started wearing green as an act of defiance, of freedom. We can wear green here and nobody can stop us. And it just stuck. Getting pinched if you don't wear green. That laugh, that's 100% something American kids made up in the 1950s. There's no history to it, no tradition. Kids just started doing it, and it became a thing. Green beer started in American bars in the 1950s and 60s. Some bartender thought it would be fun to put green food coloring in the beer, and people loved it. Ireland thought it was ridiculous. Still does. Honestly. Corned beef and cabbage. Okay, this one surprised me. In Ireland, the traditional meal was bacon. But when Irish immigrants came to America, bacon was expensive. You know what was cheap? Corned beef. Because it was sold in Jewish delis. And there were Jewish delis all over the Irish neighborhoods in New York and Boston. So Irish families started buying corned beef instead of bacon. And over time, it became the traditional Irish-American meal. But if you go to Ireland and ask for corned beef and cabbage on St. Patrick's Day, they'll look at you like you're crazy. Leprechauns and pots of gold. Okay, leprechauns are from Irish folklore. That part's true. But the cute, cartoonish leprechaun in the green suit with the pot of gold, that's American commercialization, starting in the 1950s and 60s. In Irish folklore, leprechauns were grumpy little shoemakers. They weren't cute, and they didn't have pots of gold. We made that up. Chicago dyeing the river green. Oh, this one's my favorite. In 1962, a plumber in Chicago noticed that a special dye they used to trace leaks in the river had turned the water bright green. And he thought, hey, what if we just dyed the whole river green for St. Patrick's Day? So they did. They dumped 100 pounds of green dye into the Chicago River. And it worked. The river turned bright green. Ireland had never seen anything like it. By the 1960s, St. Patrick's Day in America was a full-blown phenomenon. McDonald started selling Shamrock shakes in 1970. Greeting card companies made millions. Department stores had huge sales. Even people who weren't Irish celebrated. Everyone's Irish on St. Patrick's Day. And Ireland? Ireland was watching all of this happen and starting to wonder. Ireland copies America. So in the early 1960s, the Irish government looked at what was happening in America and realized something. Wait a minute. They turned our Saints' Feast Day into a massive tourism opportunity. And we're over here, closing the bars. So they made changes. In the mid-1960s, I think it was 1961, but it might have been a few years later, Irish pubs were finally allowed to open on St. Patrick's Day. for the first time in decades. And then, in 1970, Dublin created its first American-style parade. With floats, with entertainment, with celebration. They modeled it directly on the New York City parade. And in 1996, they went even bigger. They created the St. Patrick's Festival, a 4-day event with music, performances, street parties, and a massive parade. Today, 500,000 people gather in Dublin for St. Patrick's Day. But here's the thing. If you went to Dublin for St. Patrick's Day today, what would you see? American-style celebrations, green beer, now served in Irish pubs, parades with floats and music. Everywhere, Shamrock decorations, all over the city. Tourists from all over the world coming to celebrate Irish culture. Ireland took the celebration we created and brought it home. The circle is complete. So here's what I want you to take away from this. That St. Patrick's Day you remember from when you were a kid, the green milk at school, getting pinched if you forgot to wear green, the parades, the parties, your dad coming home smelling like green beer. That wasn't some ancient Irish tradition passed down through the centuries. That was America. We created that. We took a quiet, solemn religious feast day and turned it into a celebration of Irish pride, Irish culture, Irish American identity. We made it loud. We made it green. We made it fun. And we did it because Irish immigrants, maybe your great-grandparents, maybe your great-great-grandparents needed to prove they belonged here. They needed to show we are Americans. And we're proud of where we came from. St. Patrick's Day became the one day of the year when being Irish wasn't a liability. It was something to celebrate. And eventually, even Ireland agreed with us. So the next time you see someone dyeing a river green, or drinking a Shamrock shake, or wearing one of those ridiculous foam leprechaun hats, remember, that's not Ireland's tradition. That's ours. And there's something kind of beautiful about that, don't you think? All right, now it's your turn. If you remember St. Patrick's Day from the 50s, 60s, 70s, I want to hear your story. Did you get pinched for not wearing green? Did your school serve green milk? Or green jello? Did your dad take you to the parade? Which city? Did your family eat corned beef and cabbage? Leave it in the comments. I read every single one, I promise. Because these are American traditions, our traditions, and they're worth remembering. And if these kinds of stories matter to you, if you like hearing about the things we remember, that turned out to be a little different than we thought, hit that subscribe button. We'll keep remembering together.